The Writer Talks debuts with our first conversation entitled Purely Poems. Our conversation will be focusing on poems, poets, contexts, pennings, and all things literature. My dear friend and fellow writer poet, Indu Parvati is here. She joins in from Bangalore. Ahoy, Indu.
Hi, Asha. How are you doing?
I'm fine. How are you doing?
I'm good too. I'm good too. So
What
we
a
are
way
all
to meet after such a long time in boxes.
really, really, really. Yeah.
Right. So,
We are all boxed, right? We are all
all
in our
boxed, boxed in.
yes.
What are you doing presently? What poems or what poets, what poetry have you been reading?
Yes. So recently I've been reading poetry and writing some poetry, mostly during weekends or whenever I get a vacation because I work full time too. So poetry is restricted to those times when I'm completely away from work. Otherwise I cannot indulge in both at the same time. So poetry happens intermittently. mm, it breaks, then it starts again, but poetry is always there. Poetry has been always with me for the, let's say, for the last 10 years or so.
Right.
So I know you write regularly, right? How are your writing habits?
Likewise, actually, poetry sneaks in, in between times. That's one of the reasons why I prefer waking up early in the morning. It gives me a lot of time to sit and think, mull, muse, and
Yeah.
kindles those thoughts which I can later use and sit and write. Frankly, I think the lockdown period, with all its constrictions, has in some way helped writing. In fact, I think I know I recall you sharing with me last time that you wrote poems about online teaching, lockdown.
Yes.
Even I did.
Yeah. Can we start by reading one of your poems about lockdown? What you experienced during lockdown?
Yeah, this one. This one I actually put it in my debut collection that I published, Meandering Expressions, and it's actually entitled "Unlocking Lockdown."
Okay.
So let me begin by sharing that with you.
Sure, sure.
No movement is the movement now. Within the confines of home, it is complete rest now. The living are facing the wrath from a non living. Millions of multitudes are massacred by a microorganism. Sanitize, social distance, stay safe is all that the authorities say. Stigmatize, an insidious fear of humans continues to slay. The modicum dictum heralded the first 21, then some more, lots more, and many more. As disease and death dances on the streets, unlock proclaims the state. Unlock the economy, the bazaars, malls, and restaurants. Unlock the chariots, temples, and its ringing bells. People, please step out only for essentials. Pondering on this paradox, we stay in social distance. The number of fatalities is to be discounted as the rate of recovery is paraded. It is a game of numbers after all. Death rates, inflation rate, moratorium, interest, etc. All. This I wrote in June actually when we were just going in for the unlock one. What about yours?
So I have written a couple of poems during this lockdown, but I'll read one on the lighter vein. Because whatever I write, I always find animals scraping. There are always animals in my writing. So there are many poems which I've written with animals in it. So about lockdown, there's one poem that I wrote after reading a newspaper report. So this was about a civet and a tiger, both in different cities in Kerala, actually, and people photographed them. And this particular tiger actually played along human habitations for a few days, and people could not catch it. So this one takes birth from there. So I will read it. So this includes both these animals. I'll read it. So this
Sure.
title, when we were locked down. When we were locked down, a kaleidoscope of butterflies birthed a tiger into the city through its drifting green edges, past sleeping watchmen, past the temple of Durga. Through silent streets he wandered alone till he reached the park, bare in the moonlight, lurking by the swing, death within a whisker, my blood froze. The poet chanted on TV. Fonsebus, warden scaled every tree, adrift with echoes in courtrooms, paddling along paddling through rotten markets. For days the tiger frolicked, swatting at drones, trotting along street dogs, mauling buffaloes. Day and night he revelled in the city, till a wilful civet led him to the forest. Through the tunnel of his deep growls that night, the sky split into shooting stars over the city and forest as the green blurred further and we stayed in. So that is
That's
it.
beautiful. Yeah, I really admire the way you bring in animals all the time. Is there a particular fondness for animals, and do you feel that we can relate to that, or they
I think
somehow?
so. I think, yeah. So that's why maybe I have this attraction towards nature, and I've written poems about that too. What I see in your poetry is also a fascination about life, about people, about how you exist as a person. I think in my writing, in that, right, I even write about trees. So could you continue by talking about your debut poetry collection, Meandering Expressions? I really enjoyed reading poetry from there.
Thank you,
Yes.
Indu. Thank you. I deliberately kept this eclectic. I want to be known as a bilingual poet because although Hindi, Urdu definitely is not my mother tongue, but then this is a language that I really picked up, and although I don't have mastery in that, I managed to write verses in that. So besides English, I also write in this language in Hindi. So that's how I try to incorporate that. And meandering expressions, in that sense, brings in all these three items together, so to say, because there are poems that I wrote being on Twitter, right? Because I wanted to write shorter poems, shorter verses, and then see how people respond to that. And it was well received. That's why I included all these are traditional poems that we write in English, as well as the Hindi
Yeah.
ones and the Twitter ones. You asked me.
That's very interesting because the way you write in Urdu, I actually really like your Urdu poems. Though I am not well versed in Urdu myself, I enjoy reading those poems because I think Urdu is a language which conveys sentiments and thoughts very beautifully, right?
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
such
I really
a
love.
beautiful,
Yeah,
evolved language, and I must confess, I really don't have far from it. I really don't have any mastery of that. But I grew up listening to ghazals. I must thank my mom, despite being a tamram. I mean, she was very involved in music, and ghazals was something that she admired. So that's how I started off with that, and that influence I think is lasting, and that's how I
yeah,
managed to
very
write some
evocative indeed. Very, very evocative.
very evocative. That's correct.
Yeah, yeah.
You asked me about Yad, isn't it?
Yes, yes. So would
Yeah.
you like to start by reading one of your poems from your collection?
Yeah. Okay. So Yad, I will read Yad. Um, it has a sense of defiance to it. It is about love. It is actually about having loved and lost, and that sense of defiance and that sense of possession is embedded in it, and hence I chose to include it in my collection. So here it
Sure,
goes.
please read it for us. Yes.
Yad. पहली प्यार जैसी नशीली वो नजर बेकरार हमको तकती हुई, अध खुले होठों से मुस्कुराते इकरार हम पर फरमाती हुई, नशीली उस आवाज में वो धीमी सी फरमाइश करती हुई, महकती उन सांसों में करीबी का एहसास देती हुई, शर्मीली उस मिजाज को कैसे कोई याद करे, खिली फिजा में बदमस्त हमको बहकाती हुई, भरी सी उस महफिल में खामोश हमको बुलाती हुई, रूहानी उस रात में दूर से इकरार करती हुई, थमी हुई सी उस शाम में मदहोश हमको करती हुई, कातिलाना अदाओं को कैसे कोई याद करे, बर्फीली वादियों में उठती कसक जैसी, शराब में घुली नशे जैसी, लहरों में सिमटी हुई शोर जैसी, इंसान में छुपे हुई फरेब जैसी, बेदर्द तेरे मोहब्बत को, तेरी भूली हुई उन लम्हों को कैसे कोई याद करे, कैसे कोई याद करे.
Yeah, that's beautiful, Asha. Can you uh, tell me how do you translate these emotions into words? What's your writing process like? I know you like to write in various genres. So how do you convert ideas into poetry?
I think the poem writes itself, to be very, very frank. So most of the time, my thoughts come to me either at night, late into the night. I think peace and solitude, in that sense, go hand in hand. And then it's that first line. Once that first line is framed, right? Once I'm happy with that first line, then I sit down and pen my thoughts. I still go by the old route, pen and paper, and then it goes through. So that's how it is. Sometimes
Okay.
it's a song that I've heard, or some other times it's based on what we are experiencing. And as you said, actually, human emotions, the life experiences, the context that we are in, that I think
Yeah,
pushes the.
yeah, I totally agree, Asha. Sometimes it happens to me also. Poems mostly come as first lines or just a thought, what I would say is just a sliver of thought, and that slowly develops into poetry. It
Right.
takes time. Sometimes I just leave it there after the first draft, but that is how it starts for me as well. Would you like to move on? Tell us a little more about meandering expressions and what are the other themes you have included in that? So I understand that love is a theme, human experiences. What else do you have there? Have you written about places, people?
Yes, it's all about it's in a way capturing a coming of age kind of an essence, because I've included my earliest poems. I actually dared to include, I would say, because I started
Yes.
writing poetry at a very young age, at around 11 and 12, and then started off as poems for nature, heavily influenced by Wordsworth and the Romantic poets, Shelley, and all of them. And then my early poems were all on friendship. So even in this collection, there are poems on friendship, there are poems on love, loss, betrayal, bereavement, places, as you said. And definitely these Twitter verses, which talks about politics, which talks about the rains in Mumbai and the kind of havoc it wreaks. So it's about multiple things, because that's
Yes.
what it is. Life is a plural experience.
Yes. So I really love the way you have written the plurality of experiences and the eclectic nature of your book was something that really captured me. So yeah, so when I wrote, usually I try to stick to one topic or one theme, but I find it really difficult because I write about everything.
Right.
I write about mundane things in life. I can even write about uh, meaning things that are very uninteresting and rather very unpoetic. But one pet theme that I had for some time in my mind is displacement. Because myself as a person, right, I've moved quite a bit. And I wrote some poems a couple of years ago about displacement. Perhaps I can read a poem about that. This is not just my experience, it's not very personal also, though it stems from my experience of displacement and movement. It's about going from place to place, so it can be applicable to anybody. So moving was wonderful, but at the same time this is one aspect of moving. Okay.
Right.
So yeah, so I'm going to read a very short poem. This is called variable histories. The old place, with its brief comforts, slip off like a night warmed gown to birth us into another wintry morning in yet another city, as invisible milkmen chime their cheery bells in hidden alleys. We fumble along strange landscapes, hauling well worn belongings, calcified with regrets. Our parched eyes map strangers' faces at half closed windows, in pointless pursuit of smiles and such signs of conviviality. In our fragmented past, only acquaintances who know us by our faces, our voices, not by our hearts. Driftwood, we cease to exist for our kin. A band of strangers, we move cities in search of something. So that is Variable Histories. And this was published in a literary magazine called Sunflower Collective uh, almost a year ago.
That's fantastic. I particularly like this oxymoronic phrase you used, parched eyes. Amazing. I have always appreciated your choice of diction. It's so incisive. In fact, today morning, since I was thinking of you, I picked up your autographed book. Remember the one that you published last year on the sidewalk? And since you were talking about travel and journey and displacement, I was looking at this poem, Transporters. I think
Yeah,
that's again very very beautiful indeed.
this
Choices
is
to
a
disengage,
bold poem.
engage. I think that's another beautiful verse.
Thank you, Aisha. Mostly, I think we write for ourselves, and yeah, it gives us a lot of happiness. But nowadays, I've started reading more, and let's see how this journey goes on. Would you like to read us some more of your poems? Maybe about, like I said, right? Displacement is one of my pet themes. Maybe you can write about, you can read about something that's close to you from your life.
All
Maybe people
conquering
relate to you.
emotion.
Yeah.
Love.
Yes.
It's always
Yeah.
use human lives so much,
Yeah.
right? And this actually this particular poem. This was a result of as a result of a conversation between me and again another friend of mine. She's also an educator, but at the same time, like us, she also loves to write, and she's also a poet. And we were talking about how does love manifest, how does love come about, and what can it be defined. And this whole poem was a result of that particular conversation. So let me see if I can find that. I will read out that particular poem. I think it's called Love Life, and the connection between the two is what I've tried to explore in this particular poem.
Yeah.
Just looking for that. Yeah, here it is.
Love is what binds the universe, right?
True.
So love is the most basic emotion. Whatever we write is about
Such
love
an
in a way.
all-conquering emotion, I think, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right. A force, a plea, a sacrifice, and a profiteer, unwilling to be enslaved, resentful of rules, chiding the afflicted with guiles and truths, cause of wars and celebrations, a passion and decimation, a virtue and vice, harbinger of listlessness and of malice, pursuer of unending conflicts, usherer of bliss and emotion and enervation, sustaining jealousy, greed, and lust, companion to wanderlust, vanity, and wine, self serving, possessive, and parochial, privy to dark deeds of incest and worship, a dream, a disenchantment, a construct, and an inspiration. You are beyond knowledge, beyond being, the soul of every living soul, manifest as the plunderer and pioneer, as the ascetic and politician, spewing oracles and treatises through the centuries, your conquests belittles history. An elegance, a lewdness, a searing wound and grace. In acquisition, you infuse disillusion. In loss, you enforce victory. Monstrous, myriad, and mystical, always an unrelenting chronicle. Love life.
Thank you, Asha. That's actually lovely. I like the way your voice comes out very strongly in that, in the second person perspective. And yeah, the descriptors use are really apt. Very beautiful, Asha.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Because I honestly feel that love is so very all-consuming, isn't it? If we look at human history, or anything for that matter, it all starts off with love, its manifestation, and what it does to the person who is experiencing it.
Yes, yes, yes. I myself have written. poems like that. I remember one particular poem. This was written after the floods in Kerala, and this is a lady said she was stuck in the floods and she saw death. What she said was that she literally said it, and we heard it. She said that I realized the value of love at that moment, right? When we see that end. So yeah, and then we come back. So I've also read other poems based on this theme. So yeah, so love is all encompassing. I would agree.
Right. Have you attempted to write verses for Twitter or on Twitter? Are you on Twitter? I know you're
No,
on Instagram though.
no, no. I'm not very active on social media platforms.
Right.
So yeah, so
And
I
and I
don't
know that you
not,
published you took the traditional route to publishing. You approached
yes, yes, yes.
the press and
What I do is I write poetry. I just keep it with me. At times I send it to literary magazines. And as of now, immediately I'm not thinking of a new collection. I'm just working with my craft. So some of my poems get published here and there in literary magazines. And
right.
yeah,
Usually, which are the literary magazines that you contribute to?
I I in India I've contributed to magazines like others. Spark magazine published some of my poems initially. Then later many other literary magazines, actually Indian literary magazines, have published me. So recently one of my poems is going to appear in a platform called the Alipur Post.
Okay.
And yeah, and the last Sunflower Collective published some of my poems a year ago. So there's this, yeah, Bird Weavers anthology. So they do cheerily. So one of my poems there. So there are different platforms, actually, national and international,
You
here and there,
you
very
have
fragmented.
subscribed to them. You have subscribed to
Yeah.
them and you approach. Do you write to them asking to publish your?
uh, Usually we submit. So every literary platform has the submission tab if it is online. So we'll have to just follow their instructions. So everyone is different, right? And there's also the submittable platform. So we can go through that. It depends. So that is not often. Yeah, every now and then when I'm free during vacations. So that's the time. What about you?
I prefer online forums simply because I think there is more visibility. However,
Mhm.
I do like contributing to literary magazines. I think the most recent one is the Literary Digest. They
Oh,
also had a Lit Fest last year in Kasoli, and so it was very rewarding meeting authors there and being on that platform. So I
yeah.
contribute to that. Rattle poetry is something that I have contributed to. It's yet to be featured, but Destiny Poets has published two of my poems. So that's another thing. But I was really kicked with the fact that Carol Ann Duffy chose to retweet two of my poems because she was bringing out this anthology, and she was on Twitter and she announced that she's bringing out this anthology, and she
Uh,
would like to look at poems on the lockdown. And then I had sent in two of my poems, Leveling Loss and Leave and Let Leave, I think, and she retweeted that. So that was a high
right.
point.
Yes, yes, yes. Even I tried one. So yeah, but it is a very unique initiative by Manchester School of Poetry. Yeah, and there are several other anthologies also coming up. During the lockdown, I think people have become more profuse with their creation, right?
And I think it's also a space that is replete with competition. Although it's a very paradoxical situation, isn't it? Poetry is such a thing that it has a niche audience, very slender populace that
Very
reads
slender, very
poetry. Yet
slender.
there is so much
Yes,
competition.
that's true. That's true. Yeah. It's like,
Any poet who has deeply, heavily influenced you. If you had to pick up one poet who has deeply influenced.
among Indian poets, right? So initially, when I really started writing, I'm very fascinated by Arundhati Subramaniam as a poet.
Yes.
So yeah, I've read her poetry and I really like her poetry. Otherwise, I keep it open. So I keep on reading. I read Mary Oliver. Recently, I read some collections by Tracy Smith. So I read different people. What about you? Is there any particular writer
Right.
who fascinates?
If I have to choose one of them, it's still very hard. I would look at the whole period. I would say the romantic poets, they left a lasting impression on me. Shelley, especially, and Wordsworth. But William Shakespeare always rules the roost. I love his sonnets. I love the way he has versified, and yeah, those continue to be my huge favorites. Apart from, as you said, Arundhati Subramaniam, some of the modern poets, which also includes Tagore. I do like some of
Yeah,
the
that's interesting. That's interesting. It was lovely interacting with you.
poems. Right.
And
We'll
poetry.
continue this conversation at a later point in time. Probably we can extend to and go into prose. Then we could look at columns,
Yeah,
novels, and things like that.
definitely. I mostly love your non-fiction writing. I think you are very strong in that genre. Yeah,
Thank
the
you.
non-fiction. Yeah. So let's continue this conversation some other time.
Right. All right. Thanks for joining in on the Writer Talks. Ahoy, Indu.
Thank you, Asha. All the best to Writer Talks.
Thank you.
Bye.